Good morning and welcome to the Wise Why. This morning I am joined by Anthony Donovan, and Anthony and I talked quite in depth about whether or not we should actually go live this morning because of the news last night. I mean, we cannot walk away from it. Yeah, the Queen died, and it is incredibly sad, but also, may I say, inevitable that she would die. And Anthony is here as a leadership mentor and coach, and she was a powerful leader. She was a inspiration to many women and also men. So our forces, so many people out there. So yes, we are going to go ahead with the Wise Why this morning, and respectfully to the Queen. And I shall now pass to Anthony.
Thank you very much, Kirsty. Well, firstly, thanks for the welcome. Just to echo your sentiments, as you said, that's with a heavy heart. Don't want to dwell on it too much, but listening to the radio this morning, and the DJ was actually celebrating the life and actually really picking out some of the key traits. And as you say, she was an incredible leader, humility, wit, wisdom, all of that good stuff. So I hope some of those things will come up today, to be honest with you. So yeah.
Well, I'm sure they will do, because, when I first, and this is what people don't really know about you, was when I decided to set up, a mutual friend said, you've got to speak to Anthony. And we had a conversation at that point. I think it took us another 2 years to realize that we'd actually spoken. I really do love that. And of course, Alex, it laughs still to this day, going, how could you do forget? But I'd love people to understand why Alex suggested that I should speak to you.
Well, I mean, I guess you should, in some respects, ask Alex that question. So Alex is somebody who I had the pleasure of working with as part of a leadership development program. And what I loved about working with Alex is we had conversations outside of the learning environment. I should say this was pre-pandemic, so this was done face-to-face, but we'll come on to that later on, I'm sure. But Alex is one of those people that I love working with because it's all about the application and the transfer of the learning. So we built up a really good mutual working relationship. And as a very experienced leader, and I will say about Alex, it was a program designed initially for people who are emerging leaders. So he could very much have said, I've done this before. And indeed, he had done other programs before, but he added loads to it. And those are the types of clients I love working with. So we built up a good rapport. And I guess off the back of that, that's why he suggested that you and I have a conversation.
And he was right, because you did give me some really good advice. And of course, you've been like this heartbeat over my last 2 years by us passing. And you've, along the way, I've attended seminars that you've delivered, and I've learned some incredible insights and wisdom. And what I really liked was sometimes you just touched on something I already knew. And I think you've just said that about Alex. You touched on stuff that I knew, that I had forgotten, that I just needed to be reignited. And I do that with my clients. So why and how did you set up, now let me get your name right, Donovan Training Associates?
It's snappy, isn't it? Yeah, I didn't have a marketing professional in my life at that time. So we'll go with the surname and go with that. Why did I set up Donovan Training Associates? If I go back a little bit, and I guess this links into the why piece here. Ever since I can remember, I always wanted to be a teacher, a primary school teacher, in fact. And pretty much every teacher I spoke to, with one exception, tried to put me off. It got to the stage where I did my A-levels, all my friends were going to university. I didn't really want to go, but I didn't have the kahunas to do anything else. So I got myself a law degree and thought, no, I still want to be a teacher. And at that time, there was a surplus of teachers, particularly primary school teachers, which is hard to believe now. And it just seemed that everybody was pushing me away from that. And that's when I started thinking about learning and development for adults as opposed to children. And I had the good fortune of walking into a recruitment agency, national recruitment agency, Reed, who saw something in me, some potential. So what they said to me was that we're going to teach you to sell. So it was very much that nurturing development piece. They really stretched me, but they said, we recognize your talent, or your desire, or potential talent, I should say, for learning and development. So they actually paid for me to do another degree. And I can't think of many other organizations that would actually map that out. Now, obviously, from my point of view, that meant staying, hitting my numbers, which luckily I did. I'm putting my end of the bargain in. So I developed this great working relationship with Reed, and I got my degree, my CIPD, a HR degree, if you will. I thought, I want to use this. And I really was fascinated about managing people. But my manager at the time was brilliant. She was going nowhere. So for the purpose of this conversation, Kirsty, let's call it a business plan.
Mm-hmm.
The reality was it was a scrap of paper to my regional director saying, we should set up an office in Banbury, where I lived at the time. And to my delight and horror all at the same time, they said, okay, we're going to put you in a serviced office. You can hire a couple of people. And if you hit this number, you've proven the business case and we'll open on the high street. Away you go. So it was pretty daunting. And my first aha moment turns out I was pretty lousy at managing people. I didn't have a clue. There was no structure. Lots of well-meaning people, but it was all about the numbers. I distinctly remember sitting in a meeting with a profit and loss account, blagging my way through, not really having the first clue what columns meant. And through sheer perseverance, hard work, a little bit of luck along the way, we hit the magic number, and congratulations, you're now the manager and we're going to open on the high street. And I took a big deep breath and I put my tin hat on and I said, I don't want the job. What I want to do, there's a gap here, people moving from single contributor role into their first line management role. We're hiring people because they're really good at their day job, not necessarily because they have great leadership potential. How many potential leaders are we missing out on? They may not be the top of the charts in their day job, but they may have these other skills. And to my, again, delight, Reed went, okay, we'll create a role for you. So they moved me into their business school in the Cotswolds. It was horrendous, Kirsty. 17th century manor house, its own deer park, free food, the nicest people you could ever wish to work with. It was just, frankly, just purgatory. I don't know how I coped. And I was given effectively free rein with a bunch of very talented people. It wasn't just me, I hasten to add, to create a leadership program from the ground up. And we went on to win a national training award. So I'm still immensely proud of the team that worked with me on that, to this day. So I'm conscious this is a very long answer to a perfectly short question, but it all links into the why did I set the business up, because I was lucky enough to spend 5 or 6 years in this amazing place. And the reason I set my business up is because I stopped getting imposter syndrome. And when I tell people this, they often look at me as, because imposter syndrome has negative connotations. Well, that's not a good thing, right? Rightly or wrongly, I perceive it in a different way. I think imposter syndrome is a good thing because it means you're getting out there, you're putting yourself out there, you're stretching yourself, doing something different. And I felt that maybe there were other types of organizations that I could personally learn from, but I could maybe share some knowledge with. And that was 17 and a half years ago. I thought I'd give it a bash for 6 months and see how we got on. And here I am still making it up all that time later.
I love that. And I love the fact that you just said that you see imposter syndrome as a positive. And I do as well, because I think you've got to put yourself out there. There are points where imposter syndrome have absolutely crippled me. And they did at the start of setting up what was Opening Doors and now KVDB. But at the same time, it was overcoming that imposter syndrome that makes me who I am today. And I look back at that and go, okay, so I had it, but I didn't let it beat me. Mm-hmm. I looked at it and went, how can I navigate my way through this? And I just love the fact that you turn that into a real positive spin. And I love the fact that, you have inspired many people. And I've sat in your coaching. And as I said, there was a couple of things that you said way back at the beginning about suddenly looking at these columns on Excel. Well, I've been there and I didn't know what they meant. And there's lots of people who will be listening to this right now who will be feeling that they've suddenly got to go and do Excel spreadsheets, or they've got to look at profit and loss, and they've never, ever had to deal with it. And that's when imposter syndrome comes in. But you know what? I'm going to say it. You can master it, because I have and you have, unless I'm wrong.
Well, a master's a strong word. There's always room for learning. I mean, you and I were chatting before we started today about tech and setups, and I've scribbled loads of notes down, and that's the best. Every day's a school day, which is great, and that's what it's about. But I think if I go back and question you often get asked is, what would you have told yourself 20 odd years ago? And I can guarantee I went into that thinking, because I had this job title, whatever it was at the time, business manager, I think was my title, I should know everything. And when you lead a team of people, you're on this pedestal, whether you like it or not. There's this perception that you should know everything. And if you let people fail, then you have failed. And as a consequence of that, we go around and we try and fix things. And it's exhausting and it's grossly unfair, and it doesn't develop people either. So I think the reason I see imposter syndrome as a healthy thing is after the event. Don't get me wrong, at the time, deeply uncomfortable, very unnerving. And even coming back to the beginning of our conversation today, do we go ahead today or not? Sometimes in the moment you make decisions which you think are right at that time. You can only make your best judgment at that particular time. And often there's uncertainty around that. But do you know what? That's what makes life interesting and exciting, and it's what helps us grow and develop, and then hopefully pass on experiences to others as well.
And I love that. I love the fact that you talked about decision there, because decision is one of the most critical things we can do. If you decide to do something, then you've made a decision. If you're sitting on the fence, not making a decision, you're in that washy area of, well, just pain. Unless I mean, maybe you see this differently, but I built my website in 11 days, and Jayla, who helped me, said to me, "You're so decisive," and I went, "No, I've got a deadline, and I've got to have this up by the time my daughter goes off on summer holidays, because I won't have time." So I had to be decisive, and I was the same when I married Dennis. I was really decisive. It's the 2 points in my life where I've been decisive, but it was a lot easier being decisive than sitting on the fence. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, my thoughts on that was, it took me 2.5 years to talk myself in and out of setting up my business. And I distinctly remember sitting in a pub. It's the Easington pub. For any of you listening that know the Banbury area, it's the Easington pub with my good chum Steve. And we, as we still do to this day, which is great, we meet up most Friday evenings, and we sat down, and he looked me in the eye and he said, "Look, before we even start, if you're going to start talking about the possibility of running a business or not, I'm a little bit bored. So either do it, great, or move on." And that was again one of those aha moments, because I hadn't realized I'd been talking about it that much, or I hadn't been that decisive. And what we talked about was, well, what could possibly stop you? And at the time, we didn't have the children that we're blessed to have now, and other factors. And yet it's still a brave thing to do. So I think some people can jump in. I admire you for making big decisions in a short period of time. I think for others, it takes a little bit longer. I think the worst thing you can do, however, is nothing. If you're that's the worst state. And again, we talk about this on our leadership programs around change. So often leaders will say, well, we can't communicate this because we don't know all the information. We don't have that. Well, that's how rumors start.
Yes, yeah,
So
I hear you on that.
At least, and even if the decision is to do nothing, make the decision to do, make a decision. That indecision piece, particularly from a leadership point of view, it just manifests itself out, and it can impact people in ways that we can't even imagine.
And I think that leads, and I've been in places where that's happened, and it leads to almost a toxic working environment, because you're right, the rumor factory starts, and then people start feeling uncomfortable, and that escalates and escalates, and you end up with this whole toxic work environment just because you're sat in that world of indecision. And I've been on the receiving end of that, and it is very difficult. So I'm glad you touched. I really am glad you touched on that. Who has helped you? I mean, we talked about Alex at the beginning, and trust me, he gives me. If he is listening to this, Alex, you really do kick my derriere hard. Ow! It's still got to heal from the last one. Who has helped you along the way?
Oh, this is going to sound like a really cliched answer. Too many people to answer. I have to start with the most important people, who are my family. So my dad, who's sadly no longer with us, a massive inspiration. Was lucky enough, he was one of my best mates as well as my dad. He worked in learning and development for a corporate environment, and I think hindsight's a wonderful thing. He probably, looking back, would have loved to have done what I do. So maybe that was an inspiration. But I learned lots from him. But even without realizing about how to communicate with people, how to deal with people with respect, he used to have to make some tough calls. He wasn't always popular, but everybody respected him. And again, slightly dark subject, particularly in light of the news yesterday, but blown away at his funeral, how many people that I hadn't even heard of were coming out with stories about how he had helped them. So a massive source of inspiration, and continues to be. My immediate family, my wife, who made a career sacrifice in order for me to be able to run my business, that's never lost on me. So from that point of view, the foundations, the fundamental piece. But honestly, on a day-to-day basis, I'm blessed with having clients all over the globe. And I don't say that to sensationalize it. What that brings in is different cultures. Yesterday, for example, I was coaching somebody at an hour I'd prefer not to think about in New Zealand. So Justin was sat on his wife's family's farm. I was sat in my office at 5:30 in the morning, pitch black when it was raining, living the dream. But honestly, just getting that completely different insight, not just because he was in New Zealand, but learning lots from him. And the irony was I'm coaching him. So for me, it's the variety. It's a broad answer to a really good question. There's just too many to name.
I love it. I've learned so much from my clients that I never thought I would know about. And it's been quite interesting because one of them, I won't say who, was in renewables, and I could walk across the landing because Dennis works from home as well. And I could go, have you heard of this? And he was like, no. And I went, well, I do. And yeah, it was just really, it was one of those moments where I could go, oh, that's exciting. There's been other things that I've learned over through my clients where I've been able to go to Dennis and like go, ooh, and he's like, yeah, how do you know that? And I'm like, well, did you know? And I love that I learn from my clients as much as I get they get from me. And
yeah, absolutely. And I think I should add as well, if I may, in the last 18 months or so, I've re-engaged with networking. And I won't lie, networking's been a bit of almost a dirty word. I think of countless meetings where I've walked away with a business card for a florist or a barber, all wonderful people in their own rights, but everybody goes along to swap information. Now, I was lucky enough to stumble across Open Doors. And the reason that I mentioned Open Doors is because it's a very different form of networking. We have, for example, every session, we have 2 sessions a month. We have a member only and a guest. So again, we bring other people into the room, but we have a CPD, continued professional development. And people stand up and do showcases. And so there's sort of normally anything up to 20 people in the room, sometimes more. It's like one of the members, Dan, describes it as your own private boardroom. and that's great. And I think I didn't realize I had that until I had it, or missed it until I had it, if that makes sense. So I should add that because that's a really important source of support and learning.
I'm really pleased you did add that, because obviously it's one of the how we kind of met, actually.
That's when we met face to face, exactly.
Face-to-face, yeah, because I got invited by Karen, which was lovely. Yeah. I fell in love with Open Doors. I'm not a member, but I did fall in love with it, and I was blown away by how supportive you were to each other, but also how supportive you were to the guest. You know, it was my first actual network, apart from going to where I met Karen at the Women in Business, so Howard Feather, to Women in Oxford Women in Business Network. I came across to Open Doors, and of course I was laughing because I was Opening Doors Consultancy. I still am, but trading is KVDB. And of course I've met some incredible people, Sharon, yourself, Kathy. Kathy's coming on in a few weeks. And I'm going to move to the chat here because there's an Open Doors person who's put some comments on. So, we have had from Rowan Waller. Yeah,
Rowan did just this very week, actually. So he's a bit of a legend, is Rowan. Not that I've said that live on LinkedIn at all, because he'd get really embarrassed.
We need to get him on so you can read his book. Let's be honest. What is it? Billy
the Goat of the £5 notes.
So Rowan, giving you a shout out. You explain about that whilst I just tell you what he said. He said, "Thank you for vocalizing what I'm thinking in this intro. Difficult to consider how to go about business today." Yes, Rowan, it was really, really... we really had to think about it, because it would be very easy to stop and not go ahead. But as you know, Anthony is about leadership, and we really, well, for me, the Queen is responsible for inspiring so many women and so many people. So yes, we are going ahead to talk about leadership because she was the figurehead of the country. I don't know if you want to add anything, Anthony.
I think it's also an ethical thing. It's slightly fitting in a way that, I mean, the photo just a few days ago of her inviting Liz Truss to become Prime Minister, she looked immaculate, by the way. If you look at that photograph, she just looked absolutely immaculate. And that work ethic, even doing the school run this morning, Kirsty, it was just, how do people respond? You could see people looking at each other. Obviously, people smile and say hello, but life goes on, as it were. And I think we also reflected on the king, as he is now, of course, Charles, because he's lost his mum. And that is how, again, we touched on it, how he's gone back to work. And I think most of us, when we're in that process, it's just incredible. And you talked about decision making earlier and time being a factor. You could argue there's no choice there, but we've got to respect the fact that this is someone's mother, grandmother, great grandmother, and so on. So time for reflection for all of us, I guess.
And it was interesting talking. I mean, interesting enough, the church bells have just started really playing in the background, which is quite emotive at this moment in time. And talking to my daughter last night about it, because she's still very young, and she was like, "Well, how old?" And I said, "Well, she was 96, so 16 years older than Granddad. Does that mean we could lose Granddad soon?" And I went, "Well, Granddad's going to be 80, so it's a blessing that we have him every day." And she was like, "Will you be sad?" And I went, "Completely and utterly." And she went, "Is the king sad?" And it's like, yes, he will be. He really will be. But he has to keep going. He's now the leader. And it's that, I don't know if I could.
But you know what? Just brilliant questions to the eyes of a child as well. I think sometimes we almost need to go back to that, because there's no fluff. We're straight in there, Mum. We're asking these questions. I'm not holding back here. And I think sometimes we forget we've all had that. We've all been a child, and we've all had that ability to be straight and honest. So always learn from children.
Yes, absolutely. So Jill Gake, and I always get Jill's surname wrong, even though she's been a guest on the show. Jill Gake, an example of thoroughly modern family, a working mom, and a stay-at-home dad. Grace and dignity, steadfast in her duty, which is absolutely true. It's just, it is memorable. We can sit here, we can talk about things, and we can't escape it today. We have to respond to it. We have to. Well, it's emotive. It's emotive. So I asked you earlier who inspired you, who has helped you along the way, because that is really key to how we run our businesses. You've talked about opening doors, but who else has helped you?
A lot of fellow coaches. You've named some of these people. You've mentioned Sharon, who I know was a guest on the program previously. Peers, clients, friends. Again, there's just so many that I could kind of mention, and I think when you run a business on your own, as I do, I have a team of associates that work with me, and I should mention them as well, by the way, because they're not only are they really, really talented, they all know who they are, but they really support us, particularly, for example, when lockdown happened and we all went into that scenario. We just kind of came in together as a community. And I think there's two types of help. There's professional and technical help, but I think there's sort of emotional support as well. And especially in the moment of social media, nobody posts a picture of a meal that went wrong or a terrible holiday. Everything's amazing. And with those people, you could be really honest and say, yeah, I'm having a really rubbish day. Here's my vulnerable moment. My diary's not looking as full as it might do, knowing you're not going to get judged, knowing that they're not just going to jump in and say, oh, I feel the same way, and talk about themselves, but they'll actually allow you to kind of talk and listen. I mean, listening to understand, not listening to jump in with something new. So I can think of, if I start naming people, I'll miss too many out, and I'll offend people.
I hear you on that, and it's very important to have that sounding board. It can be really lonely. You're stuck in your office. If you've got a full client book, then you're too busy, but you can't turn the work down because you need the work. And then you look at your diary and you go, I've got nothing, I've got no money coming in. And then that why did I set up? Am I being crazy? And all those horrible thoughts that come in that eat away at your confidence. And it's those people that you can lean on and you can say, yeah. And I don't know about you, but I miss the coffee, which is why I set this up actually. I miss the coffee morning. You know, you go at about 9:30, you get your coffee, and there's always someone at the coffee machine that you can have a bit of a chat with. And I really miss that. That's the one thing that I miss, which is what the Wise Why was for me. It was to give you money.
Funny you say that. I'm based at Bloxham Mill in lovely Oxfordshire, and Emma McGregor, who does an amazing job of managing that, has just introduced a networking opportunity for members of Bloxham Mill, and it's exactly that. Now I was actually on holiday. I missed the last one, but so many people turned up, and it's just turn up, have a coffee, and just talk to each other. And of course, we missed that so much during the pandemic and so on. But I think we've got that appetite back for it as well.
Did the pandemic change things for you? Because I know it's changed a lot for most of us. So did it change anything for you?
Massively. That's not going to surprise you for me to say that, but don't get me wrong, the pandemic was terrible in so many ways, but actually it was a bit of a watershed moment. So if I can briefly explain, I was actually in Houston, or Sugarland, just outside Houston of all places. And here's the irony: I'd flown over to deliver a one-day workshop, which sounds crazy now, but of course, only a few years ago, that's what you did. We had people flying in from Boston. It's just about March 2020, early March. So when things were really, do we go, don't we? And I felt I ought to go. Flights, hotels have been booked, people have made commitments. And I sat in my hotel room, and the news came up that European travel was being banned, and I had to get to the airport like yesterday. Got to the airport, very surreal experience, landed at Heathrow, switched my phone on, cancel. And I had pretty much 5 months of work. I'm not saying this to garner sympathy, because there are far more people in a much worse situation than I. What to do? And I won't lie, I allowed myself 24 hours to feel thoroughly sorry for myself, and blamed it on jet lag, but I was feeling sorry for myself. Spent the next week just calling people up to say, can I do anything to help? I'm not asking for money, I'm not asking for anything, just partly because I wanted to connect with my clients and not try and sell. And then the light bulb moment came on. So there were two things that came out of it. Number one, I'd always wanted to do some form of online learning offering. Never had the time. You alluded to earlier when the cup's filling over and you haven't got time. So I had space to do that. So I created some online learning solutions. But what it also drove me to think about was, what are the patterns of how people learn? And I was suspicious about this before, but what I've learned is people learn best, in my humble opinion, in short focuses. So when you take people out of their office environment for a day, sometimes more than a day, it's a big old commitment. You feel by the end of the day, people are trying to crowbar more learning in. So what we've done is we flipped it up. And now a lot of the learning we do is a full day's learning will be split into 3 2-hour chunks. And we have 2 or 3 days in between. So not only are we not disrupting people's business, we're creating focus. The attention rate has shot up. People are not ducking out for a 10-minute meeting. But here's the really key thing. People have a few days to reflect and apply the learning. So they're coming back in 2 days' time saying, oh, I use that question you mentioned. You know, that difficult conversation we talked about, here's how it went. And do you know what? This was the outcome. So it really reinforced that learning for me is not about what happens in the classroom, virtual face-to-face, is what happens after it. So that has really impacted my diary. On a personal level, my work-life balance has never been better because I'm doing far less travel. So my long-suffering wife sees me most days for lunch. So yeah, in so many ways, yeah.
I think that's really good, because I notice that when I'm coaching myself, particularly when I'm doing a full day, where I schedule breaks. I think was it Hitchcock said that the average person can only, and I might have this wrong, I think it was Hitchcock said the average person can only concentrate for 90 minutes probably because I needed the toilet.
Sorry,
But
Kirsty, I switched off then. What were you saying?
I
I'm
think,
joking. I'm joking.
no, I think it was Hitchcock. I'm not sure. I will have to check that.
I will bow to your knowledge on that.
Do you know, my knowledge, I have, and I'm going to say it loud, I've got menopausal brain. So, you know, you're very lucky that I'm even functioning today because, you know, woo, yeah, just before going live, I did have a hot flush. The joys. We're at that point, and please don't ask me a question about the menopause.
I'm going to skillfully avoid that, Kirsty. I'm not going to lie.
I will say that it's just as bad for men as it is for women, and people forget that. So to all my male friends, I love you and thanks for your support. You get to turn the tails around on me now. So you get to ask me any question you want to. I always worry on this.
Yeah, well, you've set yourself up. Well, I can say reassure you that it won't be about the menopause, not today anyway. Although, do you know what? Having said that, maybe there should be more talk about that because, frankly, as it's one of those subjects from a male point of view. What do you ask? What do you not ask? So that's probably a conversation for another day. But honestly, if you do that, trust me, I'm the top of the list to listen to it. I guess my question to you would be from a business owning sort of point of view. You touched early on some of the fear moments. What's been your biggest learn about setting your business up for you?
So getting it right. The original plan for setting up the business was to do one thing, and actually there are elements of what I do now that were in the original plan. So believing in myself, that what I'd learned over the years. So I want to do sales training, but I didn't want to offer sales training because somebody had come along and told me that you needed a qualification, but I've been a sales trainer for 10 years. So I had this thing where I was like, oh, I don't think I can do that. Oh, and there were other things. And so I don't offer sales training, but I offer how you can serve in your copy and your video. So I still link it, but it's all about serving and supporting and solving, which has always been what I was on about and what I firmly believe. And social media is now your shop front window. So linking it all back to that sales process, but not using sales, if you get where I'm coming from. So realizing that what my original business plan was actually what I needed to be doing, because I went off somewhere in the middle down this route of public speaking on camera, which I do, but it's actually not what I do. I do marketing strategy behind, I look at the sales and I pull all the bits together. So my biggest learning was actually to go back to the original business plan and then look at the bits that I really wanted to do. I put in my original business plan that I would do cold calling. I'm going to tell you now, I hate cold calling. So I don't even know why I said I'd do that. I thought it was a service I could offer because I'd learned how to do it, but actually I hate it. And I hate it with a vengeance. In fact, I'm really bad at sending DMs because I always feel like, oh, that's just punting. So I don't like the cold call. So that one went. And now the business is an evolution of where I went over the last 2 years. So there is public speaking on camera, but it's much more structured. It's much more on-camera strategy, video marketing strategy, and into the social media that I went off and trained in. So I think that was the big thing, was learning that the original plan was correct, get rid of the stuff that I didn't want to do, and turning it into what is now KDDB. And I'm really pleased with where it is now. I think it's positioned correctly. So the biggest learning was you're going to get it wrong, then you're going to get skewed, and then you're going to get it right.
I think it's really interesting what you say, because there has to be an element of fluidity. It's a very brave person now that can set a 12-month plan. When we work with our clients, we often talk in 90-day chunks. So the question is, 90 days from now, what 5 things have you delivered or achieved that's going to put a smile on your face? And I will add to that, we often encourage them to do this for their personal life as well as their professional life. So in other words, have you got at least 5 things in your diary that you would look forward to? I was lucky enough, and sorry for anyone that dislikes this band, I went to see Coldplay. I'm a huge fan. I saw them at Wembley a few weeks ago. Just unbelievable experience. When I meet up with my friends, as we always do on New Year's Eve, and someone might say, go on then, give me 3 highlights of your year, that would be definitely in my top 3. So did we create the time for that? But that's by the by. But yeah, having that fluidity. One other thing you said that was really interesting, though, was that somebody said you can't do that.
Yeah.
And we hear this a lot. There's this is a family show, so I won't use the phrase I'd like to use, but it doesn't have many words in it. And I think, you know, do we see that as a lacking permission, or do we see that as an opportunity to? So my advice, and all credit to you, Kirsty, because I know you do this, is do you. You know, we talk about leadership being authentic, and do you know what? Bring it right back to where we started with the Queen.
Yeah,
she incredibly authentic, and you just look at the tributes flowing in from around the world and so on, and the words that are used, you know, it's all around respect and stuff. So for, not that you've asked for it, but my advice is just do you.
and that is exactly what I say to people. Do you. We'll finish on that note. Thank you so much for your time, and
Thanks
thank you for agreeing that actually we should go ahead. It was, yeah, as we said, it was an interesting conversation. I'm really pleased we had it. So thank you very much.
Thanks for your time, Kirsty. Thanks, everyone. Cheers.